Good day, friends of Buzzy. Today is November 4th, and so far it's really shaping up that November is the 2020 month of 2020. I personally am stressed and waiting to find out who is the president of our country for the next 4 years, as probably many of you are. This reminds me of the concept of stress in medicine. This morning, I was fortunate enough to be on a panel with some amazing luminaries talking about racial disparities in healthcare in general. I was there to talk about racial disparities with COVID, and I learned some things from other people and thought it was a good idea to talk about the role of stress in healthcare racial disparities and to update people on where we are with medications that we've talked about before, where the research is, and where we're going with COVID-19 right now. So let's get started just with general racial disparity stuff. So in case you didn't know, there are some systemic racism issues in healthcare. One of the ones that everybody knows about in medicine is that Blacks in particular and women in addition do not get as much pain medicine as white men do. They have the same situation, the same issues, and they're not given as much. Other things are that if the baby is Black, it has about 3 times more likelihood of surviving if it's cared for by a Black doctor, which is not saying that Black physicians should take care of Black patients. It's more saying that if a Black patient is being cared for by a non-Black doctor, their complaints or their issues may be overlooked. So these things are real and happen. Sickle cell is another classic example where patients are perennially underdosed compared to a patient who's coming in with something that's just as painful as sickle cell. So all of these things are there. But we talked a lot on this panel about COVID. And I think COVID is kind of the petri dish of everything that is an issue with racial disparities in our society, with access to healthcare issues, and then with what the effects are of perennial stress on the body and what that does. When you are stressed, your immune system is less effective. You don't fight viruses as well. Your T cells are not as fast. You don't necessarily have as much antibody production. There are a lot of different aspects that chronic stress can have. One thing is it can chew up your zinc, your magnesium, things that actually help with vitamins that actually help with fighting viruses. So to review our previous lecture on coronavirus and racial disparities, so there are a couple things that having low access to health causes that are specifically issues for COVID. So low socioeconomic status is connected to obesity because you can't get healthy food. That's connected to increased ACE2 receptors. Chronic stress, hypertension, increased ACE2 receptors. Pollution, increased ACE2 receptors. Living in a small environment without a lot of good ventilation and with heavier population density. If you're living in a household with 8 people and 3 generations, increased risk of having the ACE2 receptor, the virus hit your ACE2 receptors. So all of those things are really more about wealth in society and access. But how about whether or not you can get a COVID test, having access to physicians? All of these things are part of the systemic issues of poverty and generational wealth issues with racism in our society. Now, the other things we've talked about before, which are still very true, is that Black patients are more likely to have stiff ACE2 receptors. They're called methylated ACE2 receptors that make it easier to catch the virus. 8 times versus Latinos are 5 times more than whites. And having stress in your life, this wear and tear, telomeric shortening, epigenetic stress, but that is specifically linked to having stiffer ACE2 receptors. So all of these things are ongoing. So here's a couple new things that have come out in the last couple weeks. First of all, we still have increased death rates of about 2.3 times more. Blacks are dying than whites. We're still having an issue getting good data on Latinos, but it certainly seems like it's about 2 times higher than whites. So minority populations are definitely dying at higher rates. Hospitalizations have gone down for everybody. Initially, there was in a Morbidity and Mortality Weekly found that 72% of patients who were Black in Atlanta were hospitalized compared to 20% of whites. That number has come down as mask wearing has gone up. We've got less particles, all that sort of thing. These are the other things that have come out this week. One is that there is a strong risk of people with low zinc levels having worse outcomes and more risk of ICU and death. So zinc is a vitamin that is found in healthy vegetables, access to good nutrition, and zinc is something along with vitamin D that having deficiencies increase your risk of bad disease. Now, while we've talked about Black patients and vitamin D in the past, we haven't really talked about zinc as a risk factor. And so this week was the first week that a preprint found that low zinc levels are independently related to increased risk of bad outcomes. So take your vitamin D, take your zinc. Switching subjects now to where we are with other medicines that are over the counter that people can take. Trying to reduce some of the inequities by giving access to things that don't require a prescription or a doctor visit. There are no new studies on quercetin. Bioflavonoids are still something that help zinc get into a cell and are likely to be valuable for decreasing viral illness. No new research on that. Colchicine, which is a way to decrease the, it's a gout medicine. It's got a way to decrease the formation of the clots that come from the bradykinin release and the cytokine storm. That paper is still ongoing, still no research on that, but nothing that says that it doesn't help. So still good with colchicine, still good with zinc, vitamin D, quercetin. Now, famotidine, which is a Zantac medication, famotidine actually had a paper published this week that found worse outcomes. When they controlled for a bunch of different things, that went away. But I think that this is the first drug that we've talked about that really has negative findings rather than support. So Pepsid, famotidine, a gastric acid inhibitor, one study, which was retrospective, but still looking at those patients didn't seem like it made a difference. So I think that I personally would take off, I hadn't actually gotten any Pepsid anyway, but I'm going to take that one off my list of, oh my God, I've got COVID. What am I going to do? I'm going to go ahead and grab that because it's over the counter. So no more on the famotidine. Other potential things that can be helpful, we're certainly seeing that fewer patients are needing intubation, that the proning and high oxygen is helpful, but that's only once you're in the hospital. Nothing has changed the fact that steroids are only for patients who are hospitalized. One nice piece of news, though, was that for patients who are on medications for psoriasis, particularly those who are on biologics, if you watched my How to Take Biologics lecture a few weeks ago with Dupixent, the biologic taking is something you should keep doing. One large study found that patients with psoriasis on biologics, didn't really matter which one it was, had a lower risk of bad outcomes. They didn't have a lower risk of hospitalization, but once they were hospitalized, they were less likely to die or need ICU care. So stay on your medications for psoriasis if you are on a biologic. That said, if you're not on a biologic, adding one of those IL-6 blockers has been shown in a couple studies now not to be helpful. So for people with normal immune systems, taking one of the medications that we give to patients with psoriasis or autoimmune diseases doesn't seem to be helpful. All right, that's a ton of information all bolused right at once. I will say that moving forward, as America is in a stressful time period, there are still things you can do to help decrease the severity of coronavirus if you get it and can make you less likely to catch a virus. So we're still pro on taking melatonin as an antiviral and also something to help you sleep because sleep is magic. If you don't have melatonin, exercising twice a week decrease the likelihood of people catching coronavirus. Preventative health care with getting your flu shot, there's definitely still time. 2 of the people in my team this week had some form of cold and their COVID tests were negative. So there's definitely other viruses that are going to start to circulate. Keep those masks on. It's a little easier to do now that it's warm, now that it's cold, because the masks keep you warm, but they do decrease the amount of virus that you get exposed to, which if you do get sick is going to make you less likely to have severe illness. That's what I got for right now. So try to meditate, try to decrease stress, sleep, eat well, exercise, and for right now, those are the best ways we've got to stay safe, apart from masking, staying away from closed indoor areas, and if you gotta be someplace, wear your little nose clip. Thanks all, and next week we're going to have a special guest. I will be presenting in the National Institutes of Health Science Summit as one of 25 emerging companies with our Buzzy and our VibraCool. So that will be on the 17th and 18th of November. We're going to feature a couple of the other companies who are involved as life science emerging company partners. So we'll have a special interview next week with a live guest. Do tune in. Take a deep breath. It's going to be fine.